Keanu Reeves walked into the luxurious Lumiere restaurant in the heart of Beverly Hills. His simple, slightly wrinkled clothes, a stark contrast to the pristine elegance of the dining space. Before we dive in, let us know where you are watching from, and give your honest opinion, and stay till the end. Also, subscribe this channel. The chandeliers above shimmered, casting their soft glow across the well-dressed patrons seated at their polished tables. The restaurant buzzed with sophistication, the sort of place where high society came to see and be seen. It was a temple to exclusivity, where every detail, from the carefully curated menus to the polished floors, was designed to impress. But as Keanu entered, it wasn't just his simple appearance that caused ripples. It was his calm, unassuming demeanor. He chose a discreet table, aiming to remain unnoticed. Yet, despite his efforts to blend in, something about his presence seemed to have already drawn attention. Before he could even place his order, a waitress, Ashley, approached. She was dressed sharply in her uniform, her demeanor one of practiced efficiency. But her gaze sharpened when it landed on Keanu. She noticed him instantly, not as a customer, but as someone who didn't belong in a place like this. Ashley had worked at Lumiere for years, and in that time, she had developed a keen eye for judging people based on their appearance. She prided herself on knowing who belonged and who didn't. The people who walked in with their expensive designer clothes, perfectly manicured nails, and air of entitlement were the ones she considered worthy of the restaurant's prestige. And Keanu, in his plain clothes, definitely didn't fit that mold. As she approached him, her expression shifted from polite professionalism to one of barely concealed disdain. She couldn't believe someone like him would even think to step foot inside Lumiere. "Are you sure you can afford to be here?" she asked, her tone sharp and dripping with irony. The words were loud enough for other diners to hear, and some even turned to look. The arrogance in her posture only seemed to grow as she stood over him, waiting for some sort of reaction. But Keanu's response, calm and collected, would surprise everyone around him. He smiled slightly, unbothered by her attitude, and said in a soft voice, "Yes, this is the place." The words didn't faze Ashley. If anything, they only seemed to annoy her further. She sneered, barely hiding the mocking laugh that escaped her lips. "Sure," she said with exaggerated sweetness. "Just a moment while I check something." Without waiting for his response, she turned sharply and walked away. It was clear she expected him to leave. Keanu remained seated, his expression still unchanged. His serenity was so evident, it irritated Ashley even more. When she returned to the reception desk and entered his name into the system, nothing appeared. Of course, she was sure of that already. People like him didn't belong in places like this. She rolled her eyes before heading back to Keanu. "Well, as I suspected, you don't have a reservation," she said with a smug tone. "We do have a few tables available, but just so you know, this isn't a casual dining spot." The words came out sharp, as if she were doing him a favor by even offering him a seat. Keanu simply nodded, undeterred. "I'd like to dine here," he said calmly. Ashley's patience was wearing thin, and she let out a frustrated sigh. Grabbing a menu, she turned to lead him to a table, but it wasn't one in the center of the restaurant, where the golden light from the chandeliers illuminated the space. No, she was taking him to the farthest, least desirable corner of the dining room, close to the kitchen, where the noise of dishes being washed and the chatter of staff created a stark contrast to the luxury that defined the rest of the space. Without even a glance back to check if he was following, she marched across the room. When they finally reached the secluded corner, Ashley dropped the menu on the table with a loud thud. "Here you go," she said in a condescending tone. "This table should be perfect for you. If you need anything, let me know, but only if it's absolutely necessary." With that, she turned and walked away without waiting for a response. As Ashley returned to her section, she muttered under her breath, loud enough for a nearby couple to hear. "He won't last 5 minutes here. Bet he'll leave the second he opens the menu." Before we dive in, let us know where you are watching from and give your honest opinion and stay till the end. Also, subscribe this channel. Across the room, Keanu calmly opened the menu, his eyes scanning the options without any hint of haste. He seemed completely at ease, as if nothing could disturb his calm. His presence was intriguing in a way that seemed to defy Ashley's expectations. She watched from across the room, a smug smile on her face, certain that he would soon ask for the check and leave, just as she had predicted. But Keanu remained, his posture unwavering, giving no indication that he would be leaving any time soon. Time passed, and Ashley couldn't shake her annoyance. She watched as Keanu sat at his table, slowly flipping through the menu, his demeanor still calm and composed. For a moment, she thought he might be trying to prove something. But what could someone like him possibly have to prove? He didn't look like the type to throw money around, but the longer he sat there, the more she began to wonder. Perhaps there was something about him she couldn't quite figure out. As she prepared to take another round of orders, Ashley glanced over at Keanu once again. He still hadn't moved. She huffed and rolled her eyes before heading to another table, all the while keeping her eye on the corner where Keanu sat. But the longer she watched, the more perplexed she became. Why hadn't he left? Was he actually going to stay? As the evening went on, the restaurant grew busier, and more customers arrived. Yet Keanu remained in his secluded corner, seemingly unfazed by the luxury around him. He didn't glance at the other diners, nor did he seem to care about the spectacle of wealth and power unfolding around him. His indifference only seemed to irritate Ashley more. Was he trying to be humble? Or was he just too oblivious to care? When she finally made her way back to his table to take his order, her irritation reached its peak. With a dramatic sigh, she pulled out her notepad and asked with a cold, bored tone, "Have you decided what you'd like?" She didn't wait for him to respond before adding, "Or would you like a recommendation?" Keanu looked at the menu for a moment before calmly pointing to one of the most expensive dishes. "I'd like to try this one," he said. Ashley stifled a laugh, covering her mouth in an exaggerated gesture, as if she were trying to suppress a snide comment. "Oh, of course," she replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "The filet de Rossini, a classic." She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as she continued, "Just to confirm, sir, you do know this costs $350, right?" Keanu nodded without hesitation. "Yes, it sounds wonderful." Ashley couldn't hide the smile that formed on her lips, one filled with malice. "All right then," she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Just to make sure there aren't any misunderstandings later, I suggest you double-check the prices. We wouldn't want anyone to have any unpleasant surprises." Keanu's demeanor remained unchanged, which seemed to irk Ashley even more. She took his order, barely concealing her judgment as she walked away. The entire encounter had left her feeling both satisfied and confused. There was something about him that didn't sit right with her. He wasn't the type of person she was used to seeing at Lumiere, and yet he was unfazed by everything she had thrown at him. As the night wore on, the tension between Ashley and Keanu continued to build. The atmosphere in Lumiere was as elegant as ever, with live music filling the air. the soft clink of glasses and silverware blending into the background. But in the far corner of the restaurant, something had shifted. Ashley couldn't help but watch Keanu with growing curiosity. Was he really as clueless as he seemed? Or was there something more to him than met the eye? When the food finally arrived, Ashley made her way to his table with her usual practiced smile. But as she set the plate down in front of Keanu, something unusual happened. The moment she placed the food in front of him, she noticed the way the other diners suddenly became quiet. It wasn't just the luxury of the meal that caught their attention. It was the look in Keanu's eyes, the way he examined the plate before him. There was a sense of quiet understanding in his gaze, as if he knew something they didn't. It wasn't until Keanu took his first bite that the truth was revealed. The room fell silent. It wasn't because he was being rude or loud. It was because in that one moment, he had shifted the entire dynamic. The diners, who had once been dismissive of him, now watched with wide eyes, suddenly aware of the quiet power he exuded. Ashley stood back, watching in disbelief as Keanu continued to eat, completely at ease in the most exclusive restaurant in Beverly Hills. What was this man's story? What did he know that she didn't? And why had he so easily ignored her efforts to put him in his place? As the evening continued, Keanu remained an enigma to the staff and the diners. He never spoke loudly, never drew attention to himself, yet everyone in the restaurant seemed to gravitate toward him. The more they watched, the more they realized he wasn't who they thought he was. What had started as a simple, awkward dinner experience had turned into something much more intriguing. It became clear that Keanu was no ordinary diner. As he continued to enjoy his meal with quiet elegance, it was hard not to notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere around him. Even Ashley, who had been so convinced that Keanu was nothing more than an inconspicuous customer, began to feel a sense of unease. Something was different about him, something that didn't fit with the stereotypical image of a man in his position. As the night wore on, the other patrons of the restaurant seemed to grow more intrigued by him. Whispers filled the air, some even speculating who he might be. Was he an undercover billionaire? A famous figure trying to go incognito? Or was he perhaps someone far more influential than his appearance suggested? Ashley had tried everything in her power to make Keanu feel out of place, from placing him in a dark corner near the kitchen to condescendingly questioning his ability to pay for his meal. Yet, despite her efforts, Keanu remained unfazed. His quiet confidence seemed to only grow, and she found herself drawn to him in a way that made her both frustrated and fascinated. After finishing his meal, Keanu remained seated for a while, calmly enjoying the ambiance of the restaurant. Ashley, eager to make the situation feel uncomfortable for him, finally approached with the bill, her posture as stiff and formal as ever. Before we dive in, let us know where you are watching from, and give your honest opinion and stay till the end. Also, subscribe this channel. "I hope your meal was to your satisfaction, sir," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness. She placed the bill on the table in front of him, but she couldn't help but add a slight edge to her words. "I trust you're aware of the charges?" Keanu glanced up at her, his eyes as calm and steady as they had been all evening. Without a word, he picked up the bill, looked at it for a moment, and then did something that left Ashley momentarily speechless. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a credit card. It wasn't just any credit card. It was one that no one had seen before, sleek and understated, with no visible branding. As he handed it to her, Ashley's eyes widened slightly. She didn't recognize it, and she certainly hadn't seen it used in the restaurant before. She tried to mask her shock, but her hands trembled slightly as she took the card from him. "I'll be right back," she said, her voice unsteady as she turned and walked away, her mind racing. She hadn't expected this. No one had. But what was even more unsettling was the way Keanu had remained so calm, so unfazed by everything that had happened. The more she tried to put him in his place, the more she realized he was in a completely different league than anything she had ever encountered. Back at the reception desk, Ashley handed the card over to the manager, hoping for some kind of explanation. The manager's eyes flicked to the card and then back at Ashley, his brow furrowing in confusion. He quickly swiped it through the system, and his expression changed from curiosity to sheer disbelief. "Ashley," he said quietly, his voice tinged with a mix of surprise and awe. "Do you know who this is?" Ashley blinked, her mind racing. "Who?" she asked, her tone betraying her confusion. "That man, Keanu Reeves," the manager said, almost in a whisper. "This is his personal account. I didn't know he dined here tonight." Ashley's heart dropped into her stomach. She had been so focused on her preconceived judgments, so convinced that Keanu was just another ordinary customer who didn't belong, that she had failed to recognize who he truly was. The realization hit her with a jolt. Keanu Reeves wasn't just some random diner. He was an icon, and she had treated him with nothing short of disdain. The manager, still looking at the card in his hand, gave her a stern look. "You've embarrassed us tonight, Ashley," he said, his voice sharp. "You need to apologize to him. Right now." Ashley's face flushed with embarrassment as the weight of her actions crashed down on her. How could she have been so blind? How could she have so carelessly treated someone of Keanu's stature like just another unimportant customer? "Your appetizer, I hope you enjoy it, or at least know what you're eating," she says, her voice dripping with mockery. Ashley can't help but smirk as she watches Keanu. His expression is as unflappable as always, calm, even serene. Keanu looks up at her and smiles, unfazed. "Thank you." Ashley leans in a little, just enough to try and provoke a reaction. "You know, a lot of customers who order this dish end up not liking it. It's not exactly mainstream, but I think you'll do just fine. Good luck." Keanu's face remains a picture of composure as he looks back at her. "It looks excellent. Thank you for your attention." Ashley's attempt to rattle him has clearly failed. Frustrated, she turns and walks away, muttering something to a co-worker under her breath. That guy won't even make it to the main course. He'll ask for the check as soon as he sees the bill. Meanwhile, Keanu continues to eat his appetizer leisurely, as if the world around him is nothing more than a passing distraction. He takes his time, savoring the dish. Across the room, Ashley watches from a distance, her arms crossed over her chest. A malicious smile spreads across her face as she notices that Keanu seems distracted by something on his plate, completely unaware of her gaze. "I bet he's going to ask for tap water," she comments to another staff member who's visibly uncomfortable with the situation and tries to ignore her. "These types always do," Ashley adds with a sneer, but the co-worker doesn't react. Her comment falls flat. The staff member shifts uneasily but continues to focus on his own duties. As Ashley continues to plot Keanu's downfall in her mind, the elderly customer at a nearby table keeps an eye on the unfolding events. The man, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit with neatly combed white hair, raises his wine glass in a silent toast in Keanu's direction. Keanu, ever the gentleman, responds with a slight nod and a polite smile, acknowledging the silent gesture. Dinner has only just begun, but it's clear that Ashley's growing disdain for Keanu isn't going to go unnoticed for much longer. Her attempts to provoke him further will only lead her down a path she may soon regret. After taking Keanu's order, Ashley is determined to teach him a lesson, one that she believes is long overdue. She thinks he doesn't belong in her restaurant, and she's going to make him regret ever stepping foot in it. Rather than promptly delivering his order to the kitchen, she decides to prioritize the other patrons she deems more important. She pauses to chat with an elegant couple seated in the center of the dining room, laughing exaggeratedly at a joke told by another guest at a nearby table. She lingers, savoring the attention and the feeling of superiority. Meanwhile, Keanu sits alone, waiting patiently, his expression still calm and composed, as though he's completely unaffected by the passing time. Ashley delivers a cocktail to a table that isn't even hers, deliberately dragging her feet as she glances back at Keanu's table. She's keen to see if he'll react to her deliberate neglect. But Keanu does nothing. He simply watches her from across the room, not a trace of frustration on his face. Time passes, and still he does not speak up, ask for anything, or seem even remotely bothered. Ashley, growing more impatient and irritated by his lack of reaction, continues her game of cat and mouse. Every time she passes his table, she does so with exaggerated busyness, pretending to have a million things to do. Whenever Keanu looks her way, she quickly averts her eyes and hastens her steps, as if she's too busy to attend to him. Her plan is simple: keep him waiting, make him uncomfortable, and then, when he finally cracks, she'll be there to serve him his just desserts. But Keanu doesn't crack. He remains unfazed, as if he's in no rush, as if the clock is on his side and not hers. After what seems like an eternity of Ashley's attempts to provoke him, something unexpected happens. The elderly customer with the neatly combed white hair and the navy blue suit, who had earlier observed the interaction from across the room, rises from his seat. With slow, deliberate steps, he walks over to Keanu's table. Ashley notices this and raises an eyebrow, curious to see what might transpire. She watches from a distance as the elderly man arrives at Keanu's side. Before we dive in, let us know where you are watching from, and give your honest opinion and stay till the end. Also, subscribe this channel. The elderly man gives a warm, silent smile before offering a quiet, almost imperceptible toast with his wine glass. Keanu, without skipping a beat, nods in acknowledgement and returns the smile, his demeanor still cool and composed. The silent exchange between the two men is filled with understanding, though neither speaks a word. There's a bond in that gesture, an unspoken connection that Ashley fails to grasp. She watches, seething, unable to fathom what's happening in front of her. The elderly man then takes a seat at Keanu's table, making himself comfortable. The scene is one of quiet camaraderie, something Ashley had not anticipated in the least. Keanu is calm, collected, unaffected by the taunts, the deliberate delays, or the obvious disdain directed at him. In fact, it seems like he's perfectly at ease, enjoying his evening while Ashley seethes from across the room. Before we dive in, let us know where you are watching from, and give your honest opinion, and stay till the end. Also, subscribe this channel. As the two men continue their silent exchange, Ashley's frustration builds to a boiling point. She's tried every tactic she knows to break Keanu, and yet he remains as composed as ever. For all her efforts, she's getting nothing in return. But little does she know, this encounter will be far from the last attempt she makes to undermine Keanu. Her efforts to provoke him will come to a head in a way she never expected. If you guys like this video, then don't forget to subscribe this channel.